Are Africans being duped into fighting Russia's war in Ukraine? South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says his government has received pleas from 17 of its citizens who are trapped fighting as mercenaries in Donbas. The men are pleading for help to return home from the key battleground in Russia's war on Ukraine. It wasn't immediately clear which side the men were fighting on, but at the end of last month, Kenya's foreign ministry acknowledged that some of its nationals have been recruited into Russia's war machine. In September, Kenya's Transnational Organized Crime Unit found 21 Kenyan men who were awaiting processing to Russia at apartments close to the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi. Victims told police they'd agreed to pay thousands of dollars for visas, travel, and accommodation. And Russia also seems to be pulling people into its frontline ranks through deception. Some recruits answer social media ads promising safe military jobs far from the fighting. Others are brought to Russia under false pretenses and made to sign contracts they don't understand. It's thought Moscow has lost more than 1 million soldiers who it needs to replace. DW's Max Zander and Felix Moringa report the story of one man who says he was tricked into joining the Russian army.
For the Ukrainians who took him captive, Evan Kibet's story was unusual enough to post on the brigade's social channels.
I didn't went Russia for military job. I went there as a visitor.
They had caught a 35-year-old athlete from Kenya. That was in July. Now he is here in the Soviet-era prison in Western Ukraine, now being used to hold prisoners of war. Evans Kibet agreed to talk with us, but we cannot verify his story. During our conversation, it's only our team and a civilian coordinator in the room.
We signed this contract without reading, without knowing what it was on it. We got ourselves in a situation that there was no return.
He said this summer an agent made him an offer to go to St. Petersburg for a cultural festival, to talk about athletic training and run an exhibition race.
This guy came up before the race and tell us I can get you a working permit for 1 year.
He and 3 other Kenyan athletes at the festival signed up and handed over their passports. The next day, they were taken away in a car.
We asked him, "Where are you taking us?" He told us, "I'm taking you where you are going to work." We tried to tell him, "Why you didn't tell us that it's a military work?" He told us, "You saw the contract." We told him, we didn't read it. We don't know how to read the Russian.
They received a week of very basic training.
They show you, this is a gun, this is how you load the magazine, this is how you pull the trigger.
The Ukrainian authorities have seen increasing numbers of foreigners fighting for Russia. They come from places including Cuba, Somalia, Sierra Leone, Egypt, China, and Nepal.
Part of them were familiar that they will go to Russian army. Part of them were tricked by fraudsters, and part of them already was in Russian territory as students, legal workers or illegal workers, and they were promised that they will obtain Russian passports in exchange to the signing of these contracts.
A world away, this Kenyan village near the city of Eldoret is where Evans Kibet grew up. The oldest of 7 siblings, he's the family's main breadwinner. My colleague Felix Moringa went to meet them. Evan's younger brother Isaac says he's sensitive and thoughtful.
He always cry, be it happiness or sadness, he always cry. Instead of beating somebody, maybe he can decide to cry. And then after crying, he finds himself that he is released from such things.
Evans planned to run in half marathons abroad, hoping prize money could support the family. Like Kenyan Olympic marathon gold medalist Eliud Kipchoge, says his mother.
Kibet really wanted to run. And that's why he was trying to go for competitions abroad. And I knew that one day He would raise our standards of living. If he ran like Kipchoge, he would have rescued us from poverty the way Kipchoge has rescued his people.
The family now know he is a POW and worry.
When I eat with his siblings, I wonder whether he has eaten or if he isn't eating, and it gives me a lot of pain.
Back in Ukraine, Evans Kibet insists he thought he'd be running a race, not facing the horrors of the front line in Ukraine.
You go like 10 meters, you see a dead body. You die there, nobody cares about you. You die like a dog.
He says he escaped during the very first mission. He got rid of his uniform and gun and walked until he came across soldiers.
I didn't know, is it Ukraine soldiers or Russian soldiers? I called out, I shouted, "Hey, it's me." So these guys came out from their camp.
At the prison now, he's stuck in limbo. Between work and meals, there's nothing to do but wait. Foreigners don't get special treatment, even if they were duped into joining the Russian army.
They are invaders, they are part of this Russian invaders' army, and they are prisoners of war. And in case their government not interested, and this is a general case, so they will be treated well in captivity, but they will be kept until the war ends.
Evan's family is trying to get the Kenyan government to intervene and bring him home before then. We get permission to set up a call with his brother Isaac, back home in Kenya.
Hey.
Yes, bro.
How are you?
I'm fine, Bana. Yeah, very well.
I'm good. This is tears of joy, not that I'm not okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
How is Ukraine?
It's good.
It's the first time they've spoken since he went to Russia.
How is Mom?
Mom is okay.
A moment of comfort in a grey prison cell far from home.
To dig deeper into all things Russia and recruiting, I'm joined now by Beverly Ochieng, senior analyst with Control Risks based in Dakar, Senegal. Beverly, it's good to see you again. Let's stay with Evan's story for a moment. When you consider the sequence, tourist visa, job offer to legalize his stay, signing a Russian document he doesn't understand, then he's in a military training camp and told to fight or be killed. What does it tell us about the modus operandi of the recruitment networks? Are they simply exploiting visa loopholes, or is this part of a deliberately structured system?
Well, I mean, based on Evans' story, we can see, and even what's emerging in the media in Kenya, because this has made headlines, is that these groups are both systematic, but also operating within loopholes. The groups carrying out this seem to have similar modus operandi as trafficking rings. They work behind the shadows. They have a certain degree of authority, which then enables them to secure documents, whether it's willingly or through coercion from the victims, like Evans was, travel for the recruits to be able to be in the country. They scouted, a community where athletics is quite big. So a knowledge of what's going on there, what the vulnerabilities are to be able to use them for their recruitment. It's not clear ultimately how well connected these networks are with both the authorities, whether it's in Moscow or even in Nairobi or even across the region. That's difficult to verify independently, but it does suggest that they are working to some extent, exploiting loopholes within the authorities, or also being able to use authority to secure documents to be able to move people from Nairobi to the Ukrainian front line when they do not have any means to communicate to defend themselves.
And whatever the case may be, they've clearly done their research. We've seen some reactions from the Kenyan government to this unfolding problem. They seem to be playing catch-up as cases emerge. Have they given any clear indication of the scale of the problem they're facing and what they're going to do about it?
Well, on their part, it doesn't seem to be very clear how many Kenyans, for instance, might be caught up in the Ukrainian front line fighting for Russia. About a week ago, the foreign ministers of both Kenya and Russia, they held talks on the matter. They wanted to establish a means of repatriating Kenyan nationals who may be in the frontline in Ukraine. That's, of course, very difficult because relations between Russia and Ukraine, given the war, are completely, non-existent. So that's going to be difficult. Mudavadi, who is Kenya's foreign secretary, said that the situation has been preoccupying the government since it emerged, and there have been difficulties in establishing how individuals or entities carrying out those recruitment opportunities are linked to authorities both within and outside, which does say a lot about oversight gaps. But then the government in Kenya did warn the public against being duped, about vetting recruitment agencies, which is also quite difficult, especially for vulnerable communities. And for those who may be in Ukraine or in Russia, to look for consular support, which obviously, if you're looking at even someone like Evans' circumstances, Ukrainian officials have already said that he has essentially been involved in an act of war against them, which may reduce the possibility of him being repatriated. And on the Russian side, because there's a sense of plausible deniability, it's very difficult to see at what point they would be able to mediate.
I suspect this is difficult to answer, but do we know how many Africans in general, beyond Kenya, have been lured into Russia's war machine this way?
It's true, it's really hard. I remember the first clear examples that I came across there was a video of an Ivorian national who claimed that he had been recruited to fight by the former founder of the Wagner Group, Prigozhin, who, was killed in an airplane crash. There were 2 Congolese students, a picture that was being shared of them on social media just at the onset of the war. There was a Nigerian national who also appeared in a social media video claiming to be fighting on the side of Russia. There was a Tanzanian who had been killed in the front line and repatriated back home, a Malawian as well, a Somali national. So it tells you that there's a cross-section of people, but it's very hard to account for them because of the way these agencies are operating, because of the fact that many of them were being recruited by organizations, if you talk about the Wagner Group, that are not necessarily above board, and also the fact that it's very covert and it only emerges when they are in distress or in instances where a death is acknowledged by the authorities.
But what we can say is, anecdotally at least, we're seeing more and more of these stories. You come across reports that Russia has threatened to terminate visas to induce people to enlist. And the first thought is, if this is true, the Kremlin clearly has a domestic recruitment problem. What does this tell you about the pressures Russia's facing mobilizing forces? And why is the Kremlin targeting these African countries in particular? Kenya, South Africa, countries in and along the Sahel, just to name a few.
I mean, one is obviously with the war that's been going on, for as long as it's been going on, it means that there's bound to be some constraints, whether it's providing military support or military services. For a long time now, Russia has at least been known to be operating through paramilitary groups. So the Wagner Group was very well known to be in the front line even before the Ukrainian conflict broke out. And this group has continued to use various tactics for outreach. So with Prigozhin's video that emerged in a prison, if you think about that, the first thing is these are people who are vulnerable. They may be in a desperate situation where they want to prove themselves somehow. They were being dangled support in terms of citizenship, in terms of financing, to be able to either give Russia material ground support in exchange for funding in a way, a route through which they could be legally staying in the country. There was another interesting example in the Central African Republic, which is also very difficult to prove, in which armed groups that had been rehabilitated to be reintegrated into the army may have been sent to the front line, but that wasn't fully elucidated by the government. But another thing is obviously the plausible deniability still comes back. Russia itself hasn't overtly said that it is recruiting nationals. There are networks that are doing this, and it appears on the behest of the government or on the behest of the actions in the front line, which makes it very difficult in terms of assigning responsibility. And also there's just the disposability ultimately of it, in the sense that there is no sense of responsibility or duty of care for people who find themselves being taken to the front line, fighting on one side, but of course, there's no clarity on which authority actually allowed this.
Right. Well, regardless of what entity is specifically responsible, it's very clear that African men are often simply human resources for the Russian armed forces to plunder. What about African women?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting turn because a couple of months ago, actually probably a year ago or so, someone had sent me a video of a woman who was in this place that is called the Alabuga Economic Zone, which is in one of the states in Russia. And she was talking about how she was able to move to this place and get opportunities to study and to be able to develop herself professionally. There's a variety of sectors that this Alabuga zone claims to advertise. They even have an active page on Twitter, or X as it calls itself now. Now, what has emerged over time, and especially in recent months, is that this zone is allegedly being used to facilitate the building of drones, and that women who have been recruited from places like South Sudan, even South Africa, there was an instance of an influencer who was apparently sharing recruitment material for Alabuga. South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, they have found themselves assembling drones in very difficult to work environments with very little protection, extensive hours, no clarity on remuneration, and these drones may possibly be used in the Ukrainian front line. So those vulnerabilities, again, some of them are being asked to go into the service industry. That's how the advertisements are placed. Some of them are being told that they will get education opportunities, but the narratives that are emerging show a sharp contrast to that and the potential for human rights abuses and further allegations of people working in aggravated circumstances without a way of being able to go back home.
Understood. Let's step back for a second because there's something contradictory about Russia's actions. Moscow's been very active building its influence in Africa, cultural centers, scholarships, mining partnerships. But then this, tricking young men into the military. So my question is, how does that square? If you're trying to cultivate long-term goodwill, why engage in practices that look predatory? Is there some larger strategic goal that makes this worth the diplomatic and moral cost?
I mean, I guess going back to the fact that Russia itself would simply say that it is not the one that is driving those recruitment calls. And that's how it's largely been operating within the region, whether it's through influence campaigns, security support, through networks that then it can say it has no direct links with. And then pledging to give African government support in bringing back the nationals who have been caught up, whether it's in recruitment in the Ukrainian front line or in the Alabuga economic zone. This is likely to come up in the coming weeks and months. But at the same time, the kind of consolidation of support it's been able to leverage in a very small part of the continent, to be fair, because Russian influence networks are largely predominant in the Sahel, 3 countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, partly in Equatorial Guinea, in the Central African Republic, but compared with more than 50 African states where they do have consistent bilateral partnerships, whether it's in security, despite the fact that we have seen from the catalogue, both in Everson's story and even our discussion now, of various Africans across the divide being recruited or being involved in the Ukrainian front line. There's a way it's still able to leverage its long-standing partnerships in the region, going as far back as the Cold War. It's kind of an interesting contrast when you think about the balance of power and how it plays that. The fact that African governments haven't roundly come out to condemn any sort of military action that is taking place that is involving African nationals in the front line, which does see that there is a way that they're straddling that relationship, choosing diplomatic channels, of course, to be able to address it, but also realizing that without the ability to assign responsibility, whether it's in a UN court or the ICC or whichever institution would exist to be able to address the issues that African nationals are finding themselves being exploited in the front line, then the status quo is likely to remain.
Or sadly to say, maybe there is a cynical calculation going on where African governments are doing a cost-benefit analysis.
It could be the case because obviously, if you think about, especially in a world where now Africa is slipping off the agenda for many people, Russia is pledging certain things. They have signed nuclear agreements across the continent. None of them have really come into fruition, just bear that in mind. They have provided some military support to strategic countries in the region. They are still giving out scholarships. As recently as about a month ago, there was an address whereby at least 5,000 nationals would be able to benefit from those scholarships. So there is still a bit of a quid pro quo in those relations.
What do you know about the extent to which some Africans themselves have been co-opted by Russia and been complicit in these devious recruitment efforts?
I mean, there was a high-profile example of a South African influencer. She did apologize afterwards, but she was among the people who, given even her own standing on social media, was sharing, recruitment adverts for Alabuga, where women have been found to be making drones for Russia. And it tells you a lot about how using such influential people in the public is a way of resonating with the wider public. Then you have the more covert networks of people who are lesser known, but may have some communal link. So in Evans's case, being able to organize a sort of athletic event, a benchmarking exercise, means that you do know a local contact within the community who is able to provide and reach out to people who are either vulnerable or who might be more amenable towards joining such an initiative. Knowing those points of vulnerability has probably been one of the most effective things. And it feeds into what the broader sort of influence campaigns, even for Russians, has been. Reaching out to the media or media actors, reaching out to influential groups to be able to continue gaining public resonance and giving it a sense of authenticity, that it's not coming from Russia itself or Russian diplomatic channels or Lavrov or any of those officials, but it's coming from people who would look like me, who will tell you, it is okay to listen to this person. It's okay to join this ad. It's okay to listen to this message, or it's okay to sign this document, even when you don't know what you are signing off to.
It's all the validation you need. We've been focusing here on people who've been duped, who did not voluntarily sign up to fight for Russia. Do we know how many people have signed up to fight willingly?
I mean, that remains unclear, but the videos that I had seen, at least throughout the conflict, was a sense of camaraderie to some extent and a sense of fulfillment. With Ivorian, one of the things that I do remember was how much he said that he had been facing legal challenges, and he was hoping that if he's able to provide the support to Russia, then that will hopefully go away. Of course, the circumstances of his recruitment, if true, through the prison, means that he was already in a position where he could leverage or try to leverage that support to be able to then gain something. The Nigerian, I remember he was laughing in the video, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he was enjoying being part of this. That also wasn't very clear. There have been other examples of other people from other countries joining the war efforts because of their political inclinations, because of their ideological inclinations. The war has drawn quite a bit of strong emotion on Russia's actions in Ukraine and even Ukraine's own response. And that's bound to happen with most conflicts. With the Russian example in particular, it's been hard to get people who have really joined willingly from taken the effort, gotten documents flown out. There's a lot of things administrative that are involved in being able to do that. But in many instances, even just having that sense of this will pay back in a way could be a way of demonstrating that they're willing to do it.
Beverly, no doubt, some Africans, many Africans watching us right now will want to know whether they can feel safe visiting Russia, to study, to engage in sports, to participate on cultural exchanges, or should they be fearful that it's a one-way ticket?
I mean, it also depends on how much information they will have at the time. There are still ongoing initiatives between Russia and African countries for students to go in and study. What happens to them afterwards is also just very unclear. There's been plenty of anecdotes whereby students find themselves on the wrong side of the law and then they are recruited in the front line. Broadly speaking, there are still African nationals who are actively working, living in Moscow and living in other parts of Russia, people who even I've known, people who have connections to other people that I know who do not feel unsafe. But of course, it goes back to how much they're taken advantage of. In Everton's case, he didn't even know the language, so he had no means of communicating his discomfort or understanding what was going on. People who go there willingly might be in a better position to understand the cultural nuances and other issues to navigate. They may have connections to be able to get to the consulate and get support. And I suppose ultimately it's about even African governments ensuring that their nationals in the country know where the point of recourse is if they find themselves being targeted in the way that people like Evans have been.
Beverly Ochieng, as always, many thanks.